All right, welcome back to the conversation. Now we're going to talk to Harvard Law Professor Larry Lessig. And we just talked to Reverend William Barber and Reverend Liz Theo-Harris. They're fighting in the streets to make sure that we maintain voting rights. And Professor Lessig is among the folks that they referred to. They said, why won't Manchin and the others talk to voting rights experts on this issue? Well, Professor Lessig is one of the top voting rights experts, and pretty much wrote the matching funds provision in the For the People Act. So, Professor Lessig, great to have you back.
Great to be here, Cenk.
Okay, so let's dive right in. There's now a new compromise, seemingly between Joe Manchin and Stacey Abrams. Stacey Abrams, of course, not in Congress, and this is a compromise within the Democratic Party, so it's already curious. Normally, you're supposed to pretend to compromise with the other party, but tell us, for the folks uninitiated, what are the parts they took out of the original For the People Act?
Well, I mean, let's emphasize something really important first. Last week, everybody said the For the People Act was dead because Joe Manchin said he was never going to support any bill that was a one-party partisan bill. He's now moved from that position, and that's incredibly important. And he's moved to a proposal that basically has a list of modifications to the For the People Act. From my perspective, the most important modification is removing the small dollar matching fund system. But as well, he's cut out some of the Voting Rights Act provisions. He's also removed the modifications to the completely broken FEC and a couple other tiny changes, which he's insisting on for reasons that are kind of unclear. But what this should signal to everybody is that this is a negotiation that's happening. And, you know, there's going to be a lot of steps between now and the end of this game to figure out whether we can get to a position that actually unifies the party enough to get over the filibuster block.
You know, there's another lesson that comes out of it. I just realized as you were making that point, which is that apparently the thing that bothers Manchin and what I would call other corporate Democrats, and as we found out in a phone call recently, the donors themselves, is the small donor matching fund provision that you champion. Apparently that's the one thing that they say, because they didn't take out the Disclose Act. So that was really interesting. He's saying, but I cannot have small dollar donations matching the big dollars because that's a third rail for their donors.
Well, you know, the donors are saying that. And what's important is Manchin has not yet said this. And there's a really important bit of ironic history here that I think is going to play a really big role. Senator Byrd, the former West Virginia senator, sort of lion of the Senate, was an extremely important proponent of small dollar matching funds. In 1988, he made his last stand to try to get small dollar matching funds passed through the Senate. And Manchin has historically pointed to Byrd as an inspiration for him on this. So Manchin has not yet himself ruled out the idea of smaller dollar matching funds, but it's clear the big donors hate it because what they love is knowing that they can walk into a room with checks the equivalent of $50,000 for every member of Congress. And those members of Congress salivate over that money because they know if they can get $50,000 from one guy, they're not going to have to spend 5 hours or 10 hours calling 30 people to raise the same amount of money in smaller donations. So the big money is going to resist this. But I think in the end, the fight is going to be whether Joe Manchin can be inspired to follow a really great senator from West Virginia, who actually I think is the most important champion for the idea of small dollar matching fund in Congress's history.
Professor Lessig, they didn't make this deal within the Democratic Party if they're not going to get rid of the filibuster, right? I mean, even the Democrats can't be that incompetent. I mean, if they go and vote on this and then Manchin says, I'm just kidding, we're going to still keep the filibuster, this would be entirely pointless.
Well, I don't think we're resolved. I don't think they're resolved. I think Manchin, in his heart of heart, thinks that he's going to be able to persuade Republicans to join him. And then the question is when he fails at that, because it's clear the Republican Party has thumbed their nose at Joe Manchin, said, you know, you got to be kidding, because They understand their strategy. Their strategy is to suppress the votes in the states and to gerrymander in the states to make sure that they win, even if they don't have more support than the Democrats. So they understand their game. Joe Manchin doesn't yet get that they understand their game. And so I think that we're seeing Manchin move to a position where it's going to be hard for him, certainly, to walk back from some sort of compromise. But when he sees the Republicans are not willing to do anything for him, I think he's going to be willing to do something that makes sure that we see a fundamental reform passed. The only question for me, the really important question, is whether it's reform that helps not just the Democratic Party, but also helps democracy itself. I mean, it's pretty telling. Joe Manchin is willing to compromise on his no partisanship principle in order to defend his party, and God bless him. I think he should. The question is whether he will also allow for a bill that doesn't protect the insiders, which is what removing small dollar public funding will do, and instead enables outsiders, more outsiders, to be able to run for Congress without sucking up to the richest people in America to support their campaigns.
Yes. Well, you've got more hope than I do. Not that they're not going to pass a bill. I think that it would be political suicide of the Democrats not to fix voting rights and gerrymandering. It's handing an unreal advantage and an unearned one to the Republicans. So I'm quote unquote hopeful on that. But Manchin, I don't think is 1% honest. No, I don't think. I mean, that would be, if he's really waiting for 10 Republicans to vote against their party on the core voting rights issue, which would cost them seats, I can't imagine anyone would be that stupid. That's just preposterous.
Stupid is one word. Aspirational is another. But look what you said. You said you're confident a bill will be passed. Last week, every single pundit was saying there's no bill that's going to be passed. So we should recognize this is extraordinary progress. You're right. There will be a bill passed. And now we just have to fight to make sure it's the bill that has everything we need to reform this democracy against the influence of big money in politics.
So, and I say that, but with an asterisk. And I've said that from day one. As you know, you and I talked about this before. I think a bill is going to pass, but it's not going to have the anti-corruption parts. That's almost exactly where we are right now. But the asterisk is Kristen Sinema, not Joe Manchin. She might still ruin this entire process. So let's see how that plays out. But I got to ask you the most important question. This so-called compromise, they take out basically the provision you have championed all along, the small dollar matching funds. But they have all these other really important provisions, ending gerrymandering, et cetera. Is that a good enough compromise? Would you counsel people to vote yes?
Well, I would not counsel people to give up yet. There's movement, and we ought to be fighting for the most important parts. And the most important parts include small dollar public funding. And if we don't get that, then this system will continue to be controlled by big money insiders. Everybody knows that. That's why the big money insiders are pushing to get rid of small dollar funding. And I think we still have important champions. Nancy Pelosi is not going to give this up without a huge fight, at least in Congress. Forget the Senate for a second. And then in the Senate, we need Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren to stand up and say, we will not support something that doesn't have small dollar public funding in it. They need to begin making this push right now so that Joe Manchin or whoever is pushing Joe Manchin doesn't have the ability to dislodge what, in my view, in our view, because we've been talking about this for 100 years now, our view is the most important change to make sure we can begin to liberate our government from the influence of big money.
So, Professor Lessig, the question really there is, how do we do it? Because you and I we do have a slight difference. I don't believe Pelosi and Schumer or Biden are on the level. So I've never believed that they were in favor of the anti-corruption parts of this bill. I've always believed they were going to take it out. But on the other hand, you have such a compelling point if somebody were to pick up that mantle, which is the part they're taking out is actually the most popular part of the bill, and the most bipartisan part of the bill, right? In terms of the voters, not the politicians, right? So who do you think can pick up that mantle, and how do they pick it up to make that campaign and do it in a hurry and do it publicly to put enough pressure on to be able to put it back in the bill?
Look, you might be right about Schumer, and I'm not sure about Joe Biden. Although if he remembers his early days, he'll remember he was a big proponent of public funding from the start. But I absolutely believe Nancy Pelosi 100% thinks this is her legacy, changing the way campaigns are funded. So all that has to happen, in my view, is a champion in the Senate. Joe Biden needs to be pushed by somebody in the Senate. So we need Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren to step up and pick up this mantle and say, this must be in that bill. And if that happens, when that bill passes, I think it'll be part of it.
Well, look, I got to tell you, if anybody else told me to trust Pelosi on an issue, I would laugh him out of the building. But I trust you wholeheartedly. So, but it doesn't really matter, because the only thing that matters is, are Pelosi and Sanders and Warren going to do it, or aren't they, right? Are they going to push for it, and are they going to win? I've seen the media call Nancy Pelosi a master legislator hundreds of times. Well, this is the time.
This is it.
And by the way, I might be her biggest skeptic, right? Certainly on the left. And if she were to pass this small dollar matching funds and pass the Disclose Act in its entirety, I would say hats off. It turns out she was a master legislator. And this actually does make her legacy, because she raised all of this large donor money her whole career, right? But if at the end, as she's leaving, she changes the system, right, well, that would make all the difference.
Right. It's Lyndon Baines Johnson for public funding. I mean, Lyndon Baines Johnson got us civil rights. Who would have thought a Southern Texan senator would have gotten us civil rights? Same thing. Nancy Pelosi, the biggest fundraiser. Let her get us a system that is not corrupt. And I agree, that would be her legacy.
All right. And by the way, we're also have a petition to pressure folks to make sure there's a vote on this. So tyt.com/petitions, and that'll be in the link down below. Professor Lessig, as always, great to have you on.
Thanks, Cenk.
Thanks for watching The Young Turks. Really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat, emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.